Hello, chat. I've been trying to think of new things to do for my YouTube channel, and I had a few suggestions to do match reviews of games that I've played on stream. So, recently I uploaded a modern challenge VOD to my YouTube channel and had a few people request I go over my choices of this match of me on Boros Energy versus Domain Zoo. So here I am. The plan is to talk about lines, talk about thought processes, and sort of break down maybe a few things I don't always say while I'm actually playing the game. So to start, I'm on a typical Boros Energy build, nothing special per se. When the match starts, I recognize my opponent's name. They've had quite a bit of recent success in Modern with Zoo, Domain Zoo, and they've posted to Twitter a few times their list and how they are beating Boros or how they're approaching their deck building in general. So I sort of had an idea of how I wanted to approach the matchup. Now, normally, the Zoo matchup is pretty cut and dry, straightforward, but there are two possible sort of lines that I am looking for out of the Zoo player, and me as the energy player, depending on what lines they've taken, is how I plan to react. So the first line is they have a few early threats and trying to play an aggressive role, and then the other line is they kind of play like a controlling role and sort of slow down the game, and then eventually, once they've sort of answered our stuff, then they play a few threats. Sometimes both lines can involve Flage, but the more control-y line usually relies on Flage. So being on the play here, I really want to put my opponent to the test and force them to either have an answer to my early threats, or if they've kept a hand that is more threat dense, then I'm planning to sort of play my Ragavan and leverage the power of Ragavan with a Static Prison or Ragavan into a Johnny. If they kill the Ragavan, we do have a follow-up threat with a Johnny, and if they do have Leyline, we can prison the Leyline and then discharge the Scion, which is also very helpful. And they have the Lightning Bolt, it seems. They grab Steam Vent, so I don't know if that's normally the first land they're supposed to grab. I'm not sure what land Zoo is supposed to grab first, but so no 2-drop is really good for me. If they played the Kavu, we'd actually be in a pretty weird spot because we'd be forced to Static Prison it. They do actually have quite a bit of answers to Static Prison and Leyline Binding. Let's say they play Kavu and we Static Prison. If they fetch to get Domain the following turn, they can play Leyline Binding for 1 mana and have another follow-up. So they could Leyline Binding the Static Prison. It makes our attacks bad on turn 4. A play we can't really play around and is kind of hard to interact with. It almost always blows us out. So them not having Kavu here means that we're not forced to Static Prison. It does likely mean that they have another removal spell, which is also good for us, because it's likely means that on their, how many cards they got here? 6 cards, that they're threat light, because they're more likely to play a threat here than wait to play their threat later. The no plays in combat is interesting to me. I think if they had a removal spell, they probably would have killed the Ajani, or their removal spell is Leyline Binding, and they're trying to set up to grab the Abzan Triome to get perfect Domain so they can double spell the following turn. Now, this is game 1, so I'm not worried about Pyroclasm. I do want to put this Ocelot Pride into play. The other thing is they could just have some fluff. They could have, like I said, Leyline Binding. They could have a few lands, or they could have multiple Flages. They could have drawn a Leyline also, or they could have something like Stubborn Denial. So it's not entirely true that their hand is any gas. Keeping Lightning Bolt Flage on the draw against Boros is a reasonable line. To fill that in, they could just still have like a Scion or a Leyline Binding that they're trying to set up here. So I don't mind overextending a bit. Like I said, them not having a 2-drop means that we don't get blown out by the Static Prison play this turn. It being game 1 means we don't have to play around a Wrath, so I'm very happy to put the Ocelot Pride into play. And they're at 14, so we have a pretty fast clock. Alternatively to all of this, let's say things start to go weird and they have a series of like 3 or 4 removal spells, or they have a main deck Wrath. I can always discharge the Cat Warrior token to flip the Ajani and make it hard for them to interact with that. They do have ways to deal with a flipped Ajani, but it's not like a face-up line that they'll play around really, and it's possible that they aren't planning to beat that. And if they are on the full control plan, it's not like they have a lot of threats for us to discharge anyways. So we might as well try to invalidate their lines and make our follow-up lines strong, especially when playing into a bunch of removal when they have no threats. The thing I'm worried about most this game is what I call like a dynamic change, in where if they play 1 or 2 things, all of a sudden we are no longer the aggressor because our hand does not play well from behind. So I want to make sure that I keep the board state I have currently. Okay, so this is interesting. For some reason, they decided to wait with the Leyline Binding. I'm not quite sure why they would do that. I think Ajani is a better card in this position than Ocelot Pride is. And I think this Leyline Binding is a huge liability because I can kill it and get it back, but also exchanging it for a Pride is not super strong. The other thing is they shocked in to play it here, so they took an extra 2 points of damage while also taking the point of damage from the Ajani and the Cat token. The reason they would do it here is because they assume their mana is going to be fully used the following turn. They're going to use all 3 of their mana. The problem with this is that the Ocelot, anything they use their mana on, is likely to interact with the Ocelot Pride profitably anyway, so I can't attack. Or it's just a removal spell. So not exiling the Ajani or not exiling the Cat token is super interesting to me. I'm not quite sure what they would be afraid of. You're not Leyline Binding the front side of a Flage. You're not Leyline Binding. I guess you might Leyline Binding a Fable, but it's super narrow for that to happen. You might as well just Leyline Binding the Cat token or the Ajani. You might Leyline Binding the Ajani if I try to Bombardment, but then you should probably just Leyline Binding one of the front side of the creatures anyways. And taking the extra 2 damage instead of just passing and untapping is pretty bad because you're already pretty far behind and there's not a lot of things that really catch you up from this spot except for Flage. And with me having 3 cards in my hand, like it's not sure that I'm just behind the Flage. So this line was pretty interesting to me. Again, I don't know the rest of their hand. I don't know if they were just representing Stubborn Denial to try and hit a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, or if I was missing a land playing a Bombardment and just Stubborn Denialing a Bombardment and then fetch the Abzan land, like they just have more options. But I think leaving up Stubborn Denial instead of just like answering one of these 2 things and like saving your life is like pretty important here. Obviously, they don't know that my hand is very removal heavy and we need to sink damage. It's entirely possible. I have a bunch of things that rely on my board presence. I mean, my hand does rely on our board presence, but I'm just not quite sure. So this was interesting. Again, they passed and did nothing. So again, I don't know what's happening on the other side of our opponent's board, if I'm being honest. Maybe they just flooded out. Maybe they just drew all their 4 mana ley lines. The shock in, Leyline Binding, untap, play shock, play fetch land, go, make no other plays is very interesting to me. Like they have, how many cards is this? They have 5 cards in their hand and they're not playing a creature. They're not playing a Flage. We're not playing sorcery speed removal. What could be happening, and this is like a sequence mistake by them, if they have Leyline Scion, like Scion of Draco, they definitely should have grabbed the Abzan land last turn. It's just so weird. Because if you have a 1-drop creature, you're playing it. If you have a 1-drop removal, you're likely to cast it instead of Leyline Binding, because Leyline Binding is a better removal in this spot last turn. You could have drawn the 1-drop removal, but that doesn't make up for the other 4 cards in your hand. You could have been flooded, but if you're flooded, that means you kept like a 4-lander and drew 3 lands, which is unlucky and is possible, but whatever. So it's likely that they have like Scion of Draco and maybe a few other removal spells and a few lands and a Stubborn Denial. And they're getting very punished for their sequencing here for not grabbing the Abzan Triome, because if they did that, they could have played the Scion. I would be forced to interact, and if they have Stubborn Denial, they can protect it, and then I can't really like push through. And this bombardment gets a lot worse also. Again, my plan here is to just continue to press my advantage. I really just want to make sure that I continue to beat down and pressure my opponent's life total, and make sure that when I cast this Static Prison, it's not just removal, but it's removal plus 2 damage or plus 3 damage. Same thing with the Discharge when I have a creature or 2 in play. Again, this hand doesn't play very well from behind, so I want to make sure that we don't end up falling behind. So they didn't make this line last turn where they binding pre-combat. So it's possible that they wouldn't do it in combat. They would just take a few points of damage and wait like they did last turn. And I missed a point of damage, but I don't know. The way they've been playing, like I just feel like maybe they didn't have it, or maybe they're just like clicking at random. This line is so strong for me because I think it basically kills them. And this is one of the reasons why Leyline binding the Ajani last turn wasn't that great. But also I think why Leyline binding the cat token was better over the Ocelot, especially if you have a second Leyline binding. And this is why I think not grabbing the Triome the turn before is so punishing for them. Although they have Xander's Lounge and not the Abzan Triome, which I think might be a deck building mistake because they can actually double Leyline binding. You know what I mean? So like on turn 2, if they fetch Abzan Triome, they have access to double Leyline binding on their turn 3, my turn 4. Because they have Xander's Lounge, they can't do that. And because that's the case, they had to take an extra 2 damage and fetch in with the Garden that turn. They don't have access to 3 untapped mana. They only have access to 2 untapped mana. And they have less opportunity to like interact well. And so this works out perfectly for me because I get to hit the Leyline. We get to flip this to Johnny, and I'm pretty sure this is just lethal. I guess not quite, but it's lethal enough. Like, there's not many things that get them out of this spot. They could flage my Ajani, but I could always just discharge my Ajani too. I could tick up with the Ajani. We know they don't have Lightning Bolt. If they have flage, they kill the cat token, and we can just zero again, and then just like wait out their flage basically. This is also better into Leyline Scion because I can discharge the Scion if they jam it. This is exactly the worst possible against Tribal Flames, but I don't know. This is fine mostly. I mean, I don't know. Their hand has to be like Tribal Flames, Ragavan. I guess it makes sense that they could have a few dead Ragavans looking at my board, but the way the game played out, them not like going dash Ragavan, cast Leyline binding, is maybe they drew the Ragavan this turn. They wanted to hold up Leyline binding for the Tribal Flames. I just think that the way that this game sequenced out of them was very odd. They did nothing for basically a few turns, and we just got to like leverage our threats. This turn, I did play around Flage, but they had Tribal Flames, which is annoying, but they only have 2 Tribal Flames and 4 Flages, so I think that line is fine. If I did play around, if I decided to zero, they would be taking 2, so they would go to 5, and I would have had 4 power in play. That line's also better against a Flage. If they have, or I guess it's not better against a Flage, but it's better than the line that ended up happening because they would need to have Flage, which is 3 mana plus a 1 mana spell, and they've already used 2 Leyline bindings, so they could just natty play the Ragavan, and then I could untap and like just discharge it and kill them or whatever. But like I think it's stronger to play around the Flage because they have more of it. Being forced to use the discharge on the monkey here is a bit annoying for sure. Not needing to play around Flage as much as their mana is actually really bad. If they do Flage the Ajani, I could discharge it. They have to fetch Shock to flash it back because they don't have that many white sources in their deck actually. This is like mildly interesting because like if they do have Flage, they're now forced to Flage my face, because if they Flage the cat token, they actually don't gain any life. So there's the Draco I was pretty sure they had. We do kind of break off here a bit. Drawn a few too many lands after that bombardment. Okay, well this is lethal if they have nothing, and the way they've been playing kind of makes me feel like they have nothing. So I'm just gonna go all in basically. Yeah, and they've conceded. They don't even make me like think about an attack or whatever. Based on how the game played out, and I don't know, this was a huge issue for their deck. We can kind of figure out that their hand is pretty lackluster. Like I don't think their hand is that good. Like maybe they kept it on the back of Lightning Bolt plus Tribal Flames as removal spells. They just kind of bricked off, or their cards didn't line up well. But I also think that like they sequenced their spells pretty poorly. The biggest thing being this Xander's Lounge, or fetching the Temple Garden that one turn and not casting the Leyline Binding. The turn we killed them, Exacxi, is if we attack with both and they block here, I throw this at them, they go to 3, they take 2, and then I throw the Ragavan and they take 1. If they don't shock here and take the extra damage in combat, like if they shock and exile the Ajani in combat, or if they just take the damage, untap, and just have another fetch land, and have better mana, and then fetch Temple Guard and cast one of their removal spells and then cast Leyline Binding, I think they're up a few more points of life compared to what happened. And based on the way this game played out, I think they took the most amount of damage they could given the circumstance, for their sequences, and it was really punishing for them. As for sideboarding, like I mentioned at the start, I find that Zoo normally has 2 lines that they try to take. The control line they tend to lean on more post board. So what I want to be doing is I want to have my deck built in a way where I'm not as reliant on my board presence of creatures, or the creatures I have in play aren't getting got by their removal spells or their wraths as much. Now they mix in a few different kinds of wraths. Sometimes they have Wrath of the Skies, and sometimes they have Pyroclasm. Sometimes they have Kozilek's Return, etc. So it's either like a 2 damage spell the majority of the time. Sometimes it's a Brotherhood's End or whatever, but mostly it's 2 damage spells, or it's Wrath of the Skies. When it's Wrath of the Skies, it's a little bit more punishing, but it's harder for them to have Wrath of the Skies because their mana is less reliant on white, and it doesn't scale as well because they don't actually have energy naturally. So it happens later in the game for them. So they're less likely to blow you out with Wrath of the Skies, and they're less likely to have it because of that. Because Pyroclasm is, as a other option, is much better. Pyro hits just about anything on our curve for 2 mana, except for Voice of Victory. So with all that in mind, I really want to like have more spot removal, more specific spot removal to be certain. Like I want to make sure that I have answers to the 4 mana Leyline. I want to make sure that I have answers to Flage, and I want to make sure that I don't have a lot of cards that play into their cards. Like I don't like Ragavan, I don't like Ocelot Pride. I've mixed in which ones I've cut. I think both are pretty good on the play or on turn 1, even when you're not on the play. I think both are good on turn 1, play or draw. The issue is that they do get outclassed pretty fast, and you already have an issue with dealing with their creatures anyways. So every time you play a 1-drop and they play a creature, even if you have an answer to it, your creature is still just such a liability. The times you don't have an answer to it, you're actually just really far behind because now you've gotten rid of a card to just do nothing, and they always control the pace of the game at that point. If they don't want you to attack, they won't attack. If they're fine with you attacking, they will just attack with their creature and do whatever they want for the rest of the game. And that just normally means that your creature just will never matter if they're allowing you to attack. So I really dislike the 1-drops post board. That being said, I do think that you can't just cut all of them because you do need some amount of threat density. It is a bit of a mix in a lot of these matchups where you kind of need to create circumstances where things go positively for you, even though they can also go negatively for you. So when you have your Prides, when you have your Ragavans, you need to be able to find ways to leverage them. If you just cut all your bad 1-drops, you will just never have opportunities to leverage your 1-drops, and you will just always end up being behind in a lot of spots on turn 2. You can't allow yourself to do that. So I don't like cutting them all, but I do like cutting quite a few. As for cards I'm bringing in, yeah, like I said, I like answers to Flage. I like answers to Leyline. So Purge and Wear Tear. I've pulled aside the Blood Moons here. I want to see what I'm actually just straight up cutting here. So I didn't cut Ragavans this time, which is interesting. I brought in the Blood Moons. This is something that past Derek. I understand what past Derek is doing. Current Derek wants to break this down. So like I said, I don't like having a lot of 1-drops. The reason I like Ragavan sometimes over Ocelot Pride is because it does have haste. You don't really let your opponent, like when you have a Ragavan, you don't really always need to let your opponent know you have a Ragavan. You can just dash it if the game's going slow. They need to have instant speed removal, and if they have instant speed removal, they're wasting it on your 2-1 that has like not a lot of value after turn 1. Ocelot Pride is always face up. You always have to play it the turn before you attack because it doesn't have haste, right? So now your opponent just has perfect info. If they want to remove it, they can just do it at instant speed if they want to. With Ragavan, they can't really always play around it. Sometimes they can be like, oh, they could have Ragavan, I'll leave up instant speed removal. But when they don't do that and they start making attacks and then you just dash your Ragavan, you know, you get a bit more value out of it. And this is what I meant by like leveraging your maybe not great cards to get the most amount of value out of them. The other thing is Ragavan is a red card. You do kind of want red cards for a Johnny. Ragavan is a 2-1, so it does do a bit more damage, does block a bit better. I think if I were to make changes here, I would consider leaving in the Static Prison, specifically on the draws. I normally only cut Static Prison when I'm worried about Wrath of the Skies. So maybe for some reason past Eric is really worried about Wrath of the Skies in this circumstance. I'm not sure if opponent has Wrath of the Skies or Pyroclasm. If I knew for sure, I would probably leave in the Static Prisons. Ragavan is a bit better against them, so if I think my opponent has Wrath of the Skies and they're really trying to slow the game down, I'm more likely to leave in Ragavans because they have haste and you can cast them after they Wrath you. Wrath of the Skies is so heavy on mana and resources. Like I said earlier, it happens later in the game. So on turn 4, you can like Ragavan, dash, hit them. Even if you've missed a land drop, you can still play a 2-drop and cast another spell. Finally, I want to talk about Blood Moon. A lot of people ask me about Blood Moon, and I just really want to drive home that I don't think Blood Moon's good against Zoo. I understand that, you know, they are a 5-color deck, and they really rely on their mana a lot of the time. But the issue with Blood Moon is not the effect of the card. It's that Zoo as a deck is built to either be extremely aggressive or extremely controlling. Your cards don't just exist in a vacuum. You need to play your cards in accordance to the play patterns of the match. And what I mean by that is, like I've talked about going over this game, the opponent has 2 possible lines. They're going to be aggressive or they're going to be controlling. If they're aggressive and they play a strong 2-drop or they have Leyline Scion, playing Blood Moon on turn 3 probably just kills you. If they're on the play and they have a 5/5 or a 4/4, you're just taking 12 damage by the time you untap on turn 4. And like, what are you doing before that? Are you going 1-drop, 2-drop Blood Moon? Okay. So is your opponent going removal, really strong 2-drop, good play on 3? You play Blood Moon and now you're not beating their board anymore. Okay, let's say they're not being aggressive. Let's say we play a slower game. They go turn 1 fetch land, you go turn 1 creature, they set up their mana, and they go turn 2 fetch land, kill your 1-drop, you play 2-drop, turn 3 leave up mana. Let's say they fetch a basic and play plains because they're playing around Blood Moon. Sometimes they have to do that. Your Blood Moon just kind of sucks now. Or let's say they just leave up mana. Are you jamming Blood Moon on 3 mana into their 3 open mana? Because they could have so many things, right? They could have a counter spell, they could have Besejus, they could have enchantment removal, they could have Leyline Binding, or they could just fetch a white source and just set up a Leyline Binding for later. You just create a lot of circumstances in play patterns with Blood Moon that don't line up well for you. If you lean on Blood Moon for your game plan, you're just going to get blown out because it really plays into the 2 lines your opponent's trying to set up. The aggro one It's not a good answer. It actually puts you behind some amount of the time. Or the control one, where you are leaning on this card and you're not putting enough things into play, or the threats you put into play are just getting answered, and the Blood Moon matters a lot less, or the impact of Blood Moon matters a lot less because you don't have board presence already, and now you need to reset up, giving them too much time. If they aren't playing around Blood Moon, I think they're playing very loose. I think the Zoo player has to be conscious of Blood Moon, and every time you have a Blood Moon, even if it's like good against their game plan or it lines up, if they just decide to fetch differently, your card, your 3-mana card is now dead. It's just very bad, very inefficient. And I really just think that like this is just a poor game plan overall. You could cut more Ragamans and bring in Blood Moon. I think on the play, you could definitely justify bringing in Blood Moon. I personally don't like it, and I wouldn't recommend it. If you think that that's how you're going to win this matchup, if you have perfect info and you know that your Zoo opponent is like almost always going to play a control route, or you're going to game 3 and you saw them play a very heavy controlling route, you could bring in Showdown of the Scalds. I personally don't like Showdown of the Scalds in this matchup because it is 4 mana and you kind of need to be efficient. But even if you paid attention to that game 1, my opponent did take the game pretty slowly, running out of resources. I did get kind of lucky, even though I drew a bunch of dead cards in a row because my opponent missequenced their spells earlier. That happens quite a bit and will happen more post-board because you get wrathed, because your opponent has more efficient cards in their deck against yours. You need to make sure that sequence your spells so that you like don't get blown out by these wraths, but also you need to make sure that you build your deck in a way that where you can rebuild after a wrath, or rebuild after you 2-for-1 yourself to kill a creature or something, right? And so it's very important to like be conscious that if my opponent is just trying to be a control deck, if they're just trying to 2-for-1 me and then slam a Flage, Showdown of the Scalds is a viable option, and something that I like think it's even like better than Blood Moon. It's possible you could just find a sideboard plan to bring it in every time. I didn't bring it in here because I do think it is a little clunky. This is interesting. Like, I keep Ragavan, which is fine as a 1-drop, but overall is pretty not great. Obviously they mulled the 6, so like my hand does get a little bit better. Obviously, I don't think you should be basing your keep mulls on if your opponent's keeping or mulling. You can do that. Sometimes some hands improve if your opponent's mulliganing, but overall I wouldn't suggest it. I think this hand is fine. I don't think I'm ever going to mulligan it. It definitely could be improved. If this Ragavan was a Static Prison or an Ocelot Pride, in the case where it's Static Prison, I'm less likely to keep, but I probably would. And then in the times where it's Ocelot Pride, I think the hand slightly improves, but overall isn't doing very much. This hand overall kind of hits all the check marks that I want to have against Zoo post board. I want a threat. I don't want to have to overextend. So this hand doesn't force me to overextend. My game plan is to go Ragavan into 2-drop, whether it be Thraben Charm or Bombardment, depending on how they play, depending on if they play a turn 0 Leyline or not, and then follow up with a Flage. Obviously, we are weak to a turn 2 Kavu, but I can't mulligan to try to beat a turn 2 Kavu every time. And then if they have spot removal for my Ragavan, obviously that's fine. We also have 2 draw steps to draw something relevant, whether it be spot removal. I guess there's not a lot of spot removal spells that actually deal with a Kavu on turn 2. So we are like just super cold to Kavu. I think we have 2 Celestial Purges because I cut the Static Prisons. Again, probably shouldn't have done that. Anyways, not important right now. But we have 2 Celestial Purges. We also have very good draws in things like a Johnny or Guide of Souls. Or even like, I didn't mention this before, but when our opponent has the creatures, I'm okay with 2-for-1ing myself. So if our opponent does play the Kavu on 2, if we play the when we play the Ragavan on 1, I'm fine with just Ragavan attack, they block, discharge it. It sucks, but sometimes like that's what you got to do. Especially with this Flage in our hand. Kavu naturally checks the Flage. So if this Flage is our backup, like late game plan, I need it to stick around. The Kavu is naturally going to check a Flage on curve. I can also just set up like a Flage plus Galvanic Discharge on turn 4, or a Flage plus Ragavan on turn 3. If they don't kill it, these are all things that are like possible if I brick off on these 2 or 3 draw steps. So I do like this hand. I don't think I'm ever gonna mull it, but it could improve. All right, so now that we've sort of talked about the keep, my opponent mulled the 6, and they're on the play, so they have a possibility of doing a lot of things here. This game is kind of a wash. They do kind of have it all, and there's not really a whole lot I could have done. Thinking about it in hindsight, like, if this Ragavan was a Static Prison, it probably would have been a little closer. Because they end up leading turn 0 Leyline into turn 2 Scion into Kavu. And this Ragavan does nothing. And this is what I was talking about a bit with the 1-drops not really doing anything. Even when I have an answer to the Leyline, it just doesn't really accomplish much. And like, obviously they Lightning Bolt the Ragavan. They don't even need to. But if this was a Static Prison, I could have Static Prisoned the Leyline, or I could still Charm the Leyline and then Static Prison the Scion or the Kavu follow up here and play Bombardment. And then if I, like, let's say we Static Prison the Kavu and play the Bombardment, I can Wear Tear the Scion, or even Flage the following turn and kill the Scion and sacrifice the Flage, and they are left with 1 Kavu. They get to Kavu my Flage, but because I had that extra removal spell so early, it like really worked out well for me. I mean, here, I guess it actually doesn't matter because their last card is their last card is Summer Denial, and they hit and they draw a Kavu. So I don't know if sideboarding for game 3. I did bring back in the prisons. I think one thing I should have done was take out the Ragavan instead of the Voice of Victories. I don't really like Voice of Victory that much in the matchup, but it does dodge Pyro, and it does work really well on the curve. And I think having this many Ragavans isn't great. I prefer to have a Voice of Victory here. I talked about this a bit before, but with Boros Energy having so many strong 1-drops, you're actually okay with keeping a lot of 1-landers. You do get punished sometimes if you keep 1-lander and you miss, but the power of your 1-drops is so strong relative to your opponent's 2 or 3-drops that you can get away with keeping 1-landers quite a bit. And we do have a pretty high likelihood to hit a land over 3 draw steps, which I think is the range and where we get punished enough where we lose the game. The follow-up question is, what 1-drop do we play here? Both snowball pretty well. Ragavan, I think, might be the obvious choice, but I think the better one is Ocelot Pride. Our opponent does end up mulling to 5, so I don't know if it matters that much because they're less likely to actually have removal. In the case where they do have removal, I want them to kill the worst card, which is Ocelot Pride. And the times where they don't have removal, playing Ragavan on 2 is actually not much worse than playing it on 1. The times they don't have it. So I think I would lead Pride. If they have removal, they're probably going to cast it. If I play Ragavan on 2 and miss a land and they go a 2-drop, we can Static Prison and then start to run away with the game with the Ragavan. I do end up playing the Ragavan first, and they do end up not having a removal spell for it. So it works out that I played the Ragavan first, but I do think it is a bit leaning into high variance a bit more. I would rather make a play that is more flat across all possible outcomes. And so this is interesting also because we attack and we don't hit anything, and I really have to like weigh what I'm trying to beat here, or what I'm trying to play around at least. If they have second land Pyroclasm, playing the Ocelot Pride here could be game losing, especially if I miss a land. If I play nothing, I get to keep the land, but I'm not doing anything the following turn. If they continue to do nothing, or if they continue to have if they have a spot removal like Leyline Binding, if they fix their mana. So I want to use my mana. I want to be able to present things into play and sort of make it so when they have a 2-drop, like the creature, my creatures or my snowball ability is higher. But I also don't want to play into a Wrath effect. So I think the best play here is Bombardment. That's what I end up doing. It uses all my mana this turn, and it makes it so their cards are worse later in the game. There's also not many better spots for me to put a Bombardment into play. Putting the Pride into play is, I think, really, really bad because it plays into a lot of Wraths. I don't want to leave up Discharge because it doesn't actually kill anything, and I want to make sure that Alright, so they fetched Lounge, which, again, an interesting mana choice. They grab a white source and the Kavu. I think our line the following turn is pretty straightforward. We Static Prison. And here again, I don't think I want to play this Pride into a Pyroclasm, and I'm not going to. They play a counterspell that I haven't seen before in Zoo, and we just play our land and pass. I really want to sort of have this land hit a third land, so the times where they have Wrath or the times where I need to cast this Pyro, I can. And see, they do nothing. This turn is actually one of the more interesting turns of this match, and I thought about this a lot. In the moment, I kind of tunnel visioned on a line, which actually I didn't end up, like I tried to play around something that I didn't end up playing around. So my opponent mulled the 5. They have perfect domain mana, and they haven't done anything on their turn 2 after mulling to 5. They didn't play a Lightning Bolt. They didn't play a Tribal Flames. They could have something else, but I think it's most likely that they have a Leyline Binding. So if I pay the energy here to keep the Kavu underneath the Static Prison, and they have Leyline Binding, I can't discharge the Kavu in combat. It gets to block my Ragavan for free. I can discharge it post-combat, but it's really bad to lose my Ragavan in combat there. I'm fine with 2-for-1ing myself against their threats in general, but in this spot, I think losing the attack out of the Ragavan isn't worth it. And if I wanted 2-for-1 myself, I'd rather just give them back the Kavu and cast the Discharge. That way I get to keep the Ragavan. Or play the Prison and keep the Discharge for another threat. In game, I thought, it's possible they have Leyline Binding, Stubborn Denial. And so if they have Leyline Binding, Stubborn Denial, I'm actually never beating the Kavu before it can block the Ragavan. But I thought I could. So I gave them back the Kavu and just discharged. I think I shouldn't be playing around Stubborn Denial, but I thought I did anyways. So in this case, I think the best line is to give them back the Kavu, play the Static Prison, check to see if they have Stubborn Denial. They might not even Stubborn Denial it. They might just Leyline Binding the second Prison. I'm pretty sure they 100% have like a Leyline Binding. I'm fine with. If they do, we can discharge the Kavu in combat and hit with the Ragavan. If they have a Stubborn Denial, that's fine. Unlucky. If I wanted to play around Stubborn Denial, I would just pay the energy here, attack with the Ragavan, let them Leyline Binding the Prison, post-combat, the Discharge, they would try to save it, and then I would Prison the Kavu at the end of it and play the Ocelot Pride. Luckily, they don't end up having Leyline Binding. I do give them back the Kavu. Again, I think I want to play Prison here. Part of the reason I want to play Prison is because it is sorcery speed removal. I prefer to hold my instant speed removal for better spots. But also, if they do have Leyline Binding and they put the Prison under the Leyline Binding, if I draw any enchantment removal, I have an instant speed Static Prison, which is actually very effective and very potent in a lot of spots. So, again, it looks weird, but giving them back the Kavu here is fine. Again, they're on the mull of 5, and in general, I'm fine with 2-for-1ing myself against Zoo, just because their creatures are so strong. So yeah, I mean, Discharge here is fine. Like I said, I would prefer to Static Prison. I think that saving the instant speed Galvanic is a bit better. Also, if you play the Prison, your Galvanic gains a bit of value. It goes up to 7 energy. Luckily, they just had Purge here, which is like really good for me. I'd much rather them purge this Ragavan than this Bombardment. Their follow-up is Scion. Sure. Here, I think I should have left this Arena Glory on top. Spinning it here is, I think, pretty loose, but I don't know if it actually matters that much. They don't really seem to be having much. We end up getting a lot of value out of this Season Pyro. So despite how game 2 played out, so here I even played around Leyline Binding because I'm like very certain they have it. I don't actually know if they have a fetchable white source here, but if they do, I really don't want to play into it. And this is also why I think I'm supposed to play the Static Prison first and not the Galvanic, because if I don't have to play the Season Pyromancer pre-combat. If they have Leyline Binding there, I could kill the Scion on their end step and then play the Pyro and have a mana left over. Same thing if I left the Arena on top, I would be able to leave up the Wear Tear because I drew it. So here, yeah, same thing. I think this was a pretty obvious thing. They were kind of showing me that they had Leyline Binding the entire time. And now this line like matters so little because we've set up a few turns to invalidate it, played around it very heavily, and now like they're so far behind. But I do think that I could have played around it a bit better. Double Leyline Binding, yeah. We let that go underneath there because we do have a Wear Tear. It probably looks a little awkward instead of just sacrificing it. I'm probably just supposed to sacrifice it because I usually will just want to blow up the one with the Static Prison underneath. They play in a Cattle, which I really don't think should be in their deck. I don't think that card's very good. And I think we rip a Flage afterwards. Anyways, appreciate you all watching. If you have any comments or concerns, or you want to see me do more of this, let me know. Let me know what matches you want to see me review. If there's a line I take and you don't quite understand it, or if there's just something in general that looks a bit weird, I'll gladly do it. If you think I can do better, or if there's some other criticism you have, just don't be a dickhead about it, and I'll gladly try to fix it or update it for next time. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope this was informative. Well, informative enough that you subscribe to the channel. Okay, bye.